At 72 years old, I thought I had seen every shade of betrayal life could throw at me. But nothing, not even the death of my husband, prepared me for the kind of wound that comes from your own child. You see, betrayal doesn't usually come from strangers. It comes from the very people you fed with your hands, the ones you prayed over at night, the ones you carried in your heart even when they turned cold. Before I begin, I want to mention that this channel is having a $200 giveaway to celebrate our subscribers. I can hardly believe so people are interested in this old lady's stories. To participate, it's simple. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like this video, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, a little about yourself, or share a beautiful story. I'd love to know who you are. Now, let's get back to my story. My name is Eleanor Whitman, and I live in a quiet suburb outside Chicago. My house looks ordinary from the outside, a one-story home with peeling paint on the shutters and a yard that I try to keep tidy, even though my back complains every time I bend. Inside, though, it carries the echoes of a life I once had, laughter from family dinners, the warmth of my husband Richard's voice, the smell of Sunday morning coffee we used to share. Richard's been gone for almost a decade now. His death left me hollow, like someone had cut the roof off my life and let the storms pour in. The only thing that kept me pushing forward was my daughter, Melissa. She was my everything. My pride. My reason to keep going even when grief pressed me down like a heavy quilt. I worked myself half to death for that girl. I stood on aching legs at the diner, refilling coffee cups with a smile even when my heart was breaking inside. I squirreled away pennies, skipped vacations, wore the same worn-out coat for years, all so Melissa could go to college. I thought if I gave her everything, she would never forget where she came from. But I was wrong. As Melissa grew older, something in her changed. It was small at first. A quick glance at my clothes. A strained smile when I spoke in front of her friends. "Mom, could you maybe wear something less outdated?" she whispered once before a parent meeting. I laughed it off, but inside, my chest tightened like a fist. The more she climbed in life, the less she seemed to see me. When she got engaged to Nathan Miller, a lawyer from a wealthy family who dined in places where the breadbasket cost more than my weekly groceries, I thought my sacrifice had finally borne fruit. But instead of pulling me closer, Melissa began to push me further away. She rarely called unless she needed something. Money for a dress. Help with bills she said were emergencies. And each time, I gave without hesitation, even pawning the necklace my mother left me just to see her smile. I believed I was investing in her happiness, but deep down, I didn't realize I was buying my own erasure. Because while I was breaking my back for Melissa, she was mocking me behind mine. I'll never forget the day Martha Jenkins, my neighbor, pulled me aside and repeated the words Melissa had said to her bridesmaids, "My mom? She probably won't even remember the date. She's useless." That word, useless, burned through me like fire. Tell me, what would you do if your only child laughed behind your back like that? Would you forgive her? Or would you let her learn what happens when a mother's silence finally breaks? Because my silence wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of something she would never forget. When Melissa was a little girl, she used to cling to my skirt at the grocery store, her tiny fingers gripping the fabric like I was her whole world. She'd look up at me with those big brown eyes and say, "Don't let go, Mama." Back then, I believed she never would. But the truth is, children don't always grow away from your hand, sometimes, they pull away from your heart. The first time I noticed it, Melissa was in high school. She had made new friends, girls with shiny hair and expensive sneakers, the kind I could never afford for her. I showed up to a football game one Friday, wearing my best church dress, thinking she'd be glad to see me in the stands. Instead, I caught her looking at me from across the bleachers, her smile faltering, her face turning red as her friends whispered. Later that night, she muttered under her breath, "Mom, you didn't have to come looking like that." It stung, but I told myself it was just teenage pride. That she would outgrow it. But she didn't. By the time she left for college, her visits home grew fewer and shorter. I'd spend hours cooking her favorite meals, chicken pot pie, cornbread, peach cobbler, only for her to say she didn't have time to stay. She'd grab leftovers, kiss my cheek distractedly, and vanish. And yet, whenever her wallet ran dry, the phone calls came. "Mom, can you spot me just this once?" she'd ask. I would take double shifts at the diner, pour endless cups of coffee for truckers at 3 a.m., just so I could wire her the money she needed. She always promised she'd pay me back. She never did. When she graduated and announced her engagement to Nathan Miller, I thought things might finally turn around. I hoped she'd introduce me proudly as the mother who raised her against all odds. But the day I met Nathan's parents for the first time, Melissa barely looked at me. Nathan's mother, Patricia, wore a pearl necklace that must have cost more than my house. His father spoke with the kind of polished tone you only hear on the evening news. And there I was, sitting in my faded blue dress, clutching my purse in my lap. Melissa never once looked in my direction as she told them, "I built my life on my own. I never had much, but I made it." I sat there in silence, the truth pressing against my throat. Did she forget every sacrifice I made? Or was she deliberately erasing me to fit into their perfect picture? That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how love could sour into shame so quickly. I asked myself the question every mother dreads: did I raise a daughter who was ashamed of me? Tell me, if your child denied your existence in front of strangers, would you bite your tongue? Or would you remind them that a mother's silence can speak louder than her words? Because in that silence, I began to plan. The first time I stepped into Nathan Miller's world, I felt like I had crossed into a different universe. His family's condo towered over Lake Michigan, glass walls shining under the Chicago skyline. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, velvet couches, a chandelier that looked like it had been stolen from a palace. Even their dog, a fluffy white poodle named Duchess, looked more expensive than my car. Melissa fit right in. She wore a sleek red dress that clung to her figure, her hair styled in perfect waves. She moved around that apartment like she had always belonged there. And for the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger standing next to my own daughter. Nathan was polite enough. Handsome, tall, with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing doors will always open for you. His parents, though, studied me with polite smiles that never reached their eyes. "This is my mom, Eleanor," Melissa said quickly, as if she wanted to get it over with. I smiled, extended my hand, and Patricia Miller, Nathan's mother, shook it lightly, as though she was afraid to get fingerprints on her pearls. Melissa cleared her throat. "My mom works, well, she's retired now. But she used to waitress at a diner." The room went quiet for a beat, like my job was a stain that had splattered across their perfect rug. Patricia tilted her head, forced a smile, and said, "How charming." Charming. That word cut deeper than any knife. I sat on the edge of their velvet couch, clutching my purse, listening to Nathan's father talk about investments, country clubs, and vacations in Europe. Melissa laughed along with them, sipping champagne from a crystal glass. Not once did she look my way. When dinner was served, I reached for the salad fork but fumbled. I had never seen so many utensils laid out for one meal. Melissa leaned over and whispered, sharp enough for me to feel the sting, "Mom, please don't embarrass me." I wanted to disappear into that marble floor. After dinner, as we were leaving, I overheard Patricia tell Nathan, "She seems simple. Are you sure she'll fit into our family?" Melissa didn't defend me. She didn't even pause. She just laughed nervously and said, "Don't worry. She won't be around much." That night, lying in my quiet little house, I replayed those words over and over. She won't be around much. My daughter had not only erased my sacrifices, she had erased me. But here's the thing about being underestimated, it can either break you, or it can build you into something sharper. I chose the latter. Melissa thought she was stepping into a new world where I didn't belong. But she didn't know I carried something stronger than marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I carried the voice of her grandmother. A voice that would soon remind her that blood cannot be erased, no matter how high you climb. Tell me, would you sit quietly while your child treated you like a shadow? Or would you wait, patiently, for the moment when silence could turn into power? Because I was already waiting. There are wounds that cut your flesh, and then there are wounds that cut your spirit. I thought I had already endured the worst of Melissa's distance, the shame, the silence, the way she erased me in front of strangers. But nothing compared to what I was about to hear. It happened on a warm afternoon when my neighbor, Martha Jenkins, stopped by with a pie. Martha and I had known each other for decades. She was the kind of woman who had ears everywhere, not because she was nosy, but because she worked part-time as a caterer. And in Chicago, caterers hear more secrets than priests. She set the pie on my kitchen table, glanced around to make sure we were alone, and then leaned close. "Eleanor," she whispered, "I need to tell you something I heard at the Miller house." My stomach dropped. Martha's eyes carried a heaviness I'd never seen before. She took a deep breath and said, "Melissa was with her bridesmaids, talking about the wedding. And Eleanor, she said you probably wouldn't even remember the date." She laughed. "Said you were useless. That it might be better if you didn't show up, less embarrassment for her." Useless. That word echoed in my head, louder than church bells on a Sunday morning. I felt my knees weaken. I gripped the edge of the counter just to stay upright. Martha reached for my arm, steadying me, but I waved her off. "No, I'm fine," I whispered, though my voice was trembling. Inside, I was breaking. How could my only child, the girl I had raised with blistered hands and sleepless nights, the one I had sacrificed everything for, call me useless? I thought back to the nights I stayed up sewing her school clothes because we couldn't afford new ones. To the mornings I skipped breakfast so she could eat before school. To the double shifts I worked so she could walk across that college graduation stage. And all of it, in her eyes, had amounted to nothing. That night, I sat alone in my small living room, staring at the faded family photos on the wall. Richard's smile. Melissa's gap-toothed grin from second grade. The life we had built together. All of it seemed like a cruel joke now. I wanted to call her, to scream, to demand answers. But something in me stopped. For the first time, I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't beg for her love. I didn't try to fix what she had broken. Instead, I let the silence settle. Because in that silence, something stronger began to grow. Melissa thought I was too weak to matter, too old to fight back. But she didn't know the truth. She didn't know about the cassette tape tucked away in my drawer, the recording of her grandmother's will. A will that demanded respect for family, or else everything would slip through her fingers. Tell me, what would you do if your only child called you useless? Would you swallow the pain and move on? Or would you wait for the moment to remind her that mothers may grow old, but they never grow powerless? Because that was the night I decided Melissa was going to learn. The night Melissa's words echoed in my ears, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying that single word over and over, useless. It was strange. The more I thought about it, the less it broke me and the more it sharpened me. Her cruelty didn't crush me, it lit a fire I hadn't felt in years. And in that fire, I remembered something. Something she had long forgotten. I slipped out of bed, my joints aching with every step, and went to my dresser. At the back of the bottom drawer, hidden beneath old scarves, was a small metal box. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, not from fear, but from the weight of what it held. Inside was an object most people in this glittering new world of Melissa's would scoff at, a cassette tape. The label was worn, the ink faded, but I knew exactly whose voice was on it. My mother. Margaret Whitman. Before she passed, she had sat down with a lawyer and recorded her last will and testament. I don't trust papers, she had told me. Anyone can change words on a page. But a voice is harder to erase. I hadn't listened to that tape in years. I had tucked it away, unsure when or if I'd ever need it. But that night, sitting on the edge of my bed with tears still drying on my cheeks, I pressed play. The tape crackled, and then her voice came through, faint, aged, but steady. This is Margaret Whitman. If you are hearing this, I have passed on. To my granddaughter Melissa, I leave my inheritance, but only if she honors the family that raised her. She must never forget her roots, never abandon those who sacrificed for her. If she fails, the inheritance is revoked and will pass directly to my daughter, Eleanor. I froze. There it was. Proof. My mother had seen the possibility long before I had. She knew the dangers of pride, of forgetting where you came from. And she had left me with a weapon, not of violence, but of truth. Melissa believed her grandmother had left her nothing. That was the story she told Nathan, his family, and anyone else who asked. She liked to paint herself as the girl who rose from nothing, who built her life on her own grit. She never knew that her grandmother had placed a condition on her legacy. And now, that condition had come due. I listened to the tape 3 times that night, each time feeling my resolve harden. It wasn't about money, not really. It was about respect. About showing Melissa that the roots she tried to cut away were the very ones keeping her steady. Without them, she would fall. I placed the tape back into the box, locked it tight, and slipped the key into my purse. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weak. I felt powerful. Melissa thought I had nothing left to give. But what she didn't know was that I had something left to take. And I was going to choose the perfect moment. Tell me, if you had proof that could shatter the lies your child told the world, would you keep it hidden? Or would you wait until the very moment it would hurt the most? Because I already knew where and when I would press play. From the moment I placed that cassette tape back into its box, I knew my plan had begun. I didn't announce it. I didn't rant or scream or send Melissa a letter filled with angry words. No, I stayed quiet. Because silence, when wielded right, is not weakness. It is strategy. Melissa continued planning her grand wedding, and not once did she call to ask if I'd be there. She assumed I was too old, too frail, too forgetful. And instead of correcting her, I leaned into her assumptions. I let her believe I had simply faded into the background of her life. When the invitations went out, my mailbox stayed empty. I heard about the date through Martha, who was helping with the catering. My daughter hadn't even bothered to send me one. That should have broken me. Instead, it fueled me. Every time I walked past the drawer with the cassette tape, I reminded myself, patience, Eleanor. Wait for the moment. I started planning in small ways. I pulled my navy blue dress from the back of the closet, the one I had worn only a handful of times. I polished my old black shoes until they shone. I found the key to the box and slipped it into my worn handbag, the kind of bag nobody notices but that always carries more than it seems. Neighbors asked, "Eleanor, aren't you going to the ceremony?" I'd smile faintly, shake my head, and say, "Oh, I don't think Melissa expects me there." They looked at me with pity, whispering behind my back, but I let them. Let them think I was too broken, too forgetful. Melissa wanted me invisible. I was going to give her exactly that, until the very moment I chose to appear. On the morning of the wedding, I brewed a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table as though it were any other day. I could picture Melissa walking down the aisle in satin, Nathan standing proud beside her, the cameras flashing. And I knew she wasn't thinking of me at all. That was exactly how I wanted it. I didn't go to the church. I didn't wave at her from the pews. Instead, I sat in my quiet living room, the radio humming softly, wearing my navy blue dress like armor. While the vows were spoken, I waited. While the photographs were taken, I steadied myself. And when the reception began in that grand Chicago ballroom, I picked up my handbag, tucked the cassette recorder inside, and headed for the train. The ride downtown felt endless. My heart pounded in my chest, but not from fear. From anticipation. Each station that passed brought me closer to the moment Melissa would realize her mother was not as powerless as she believed. Tell me, what would you do if your child erased you from the most important day of her life? Would you accept the erasure, or would you choose the moment to remind her, and everyone watching, that mothers do not vanish so easily? Because that was the night I decided to step back into her world, not as a forgotten guest, but as the storm she never saw coming. The morning of the wedding, I woke before dawn. My house was quiet, still holding the chill of the night, but my heart was steady. On the dresser, my navy blue dress hung neatly pressed, my old shoes polished beside it. I had laid everything out the night before, not because I wanted to look glamorous, but because I wanted to look ready. Melissa believed I'd forget this day, or worse, that I'd be too weak to show up. And in a way, she was right, I didn't show up. Not to the church, at least. Instead, I brewed a small pot of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, listening to the radio as the sun crawled across the sky. I pictured the church packed with flowers, with guests smiling as Melissa walked down the aisle. She looked beautiful in my mind's eye, radiant in satin and lace. But the beauty was wasted, because she had made sure her own mother wasn't there to witness it. It hurt, I won't lie. Every fiber of me wanted to be sitting in one of those pews, watching my daughter begin a new life. But I reminded myself, this wasn't about me missing out. This was about me choosing the moment. So, while Melissa said her vows, I sat in silence. While Nathan kissed her hand in front of the cameras, I folded laundry. While they celebrated with their guests, I polished the little cassette recorder one last time, running my fingers over its scratched surface like it was a weapon waiting to be drawn. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as I stepped outside later that afternoon. I could feel their pity in the way they looked at me. To them, I was the forgotten mother, left behind on her daughter's big day. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know I was preparing for something far greater than sitting quietly in a church pew. By the time the reception began, I was on the train heading downtown. The city stretched before me, glittering under the setting sun. My handbag rested on my lap, heavier than usual, not because of its contents, but because of the weight of what I was carrying, my mother's voice, my dignity, my revenge. Each stop brought me closer to the Hilton Grand Ballroom. I imagined the chandeliers, the polished floors, the laughter of guests who had been told I was too insignificant to matter. I pictured Melissa, radiant and smug, surrounded by people who only knew her version of the truth. And with every mile, my nerves shifted into something else, anticipation. When the train pulled into the downtown station, I rose slowly, straightened my dress, and stepped onto the platform. The evening air was cool against my face, crisp with the smell of the city. I walked the few blocks to the hotel, my heels clicking against the pavement, each step steadier than the last. Tell me, would you walk into a room where no one expected you, knowing you were about to change everything with a single move? Would you keep your head down, or would you lift it high, ready to remind them all of the truth? Because I wasn't just walking into a wedding reception. I was walking into a reckoning. The Hilton Grand Ballroom glowed like something out of a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across tables dressed in white linen, with centerpieces of roses and hydrangeas reaching skyward like little trees. Waiters in black jackets glided between tables with trays of champagne, and a string quartet filled the air with soft, polished music. It was dazzling. It was intimidating. And it was everything Melissa had ever wanted. I paused at the door, taking it all in. I knew I didn't belong in this world, not with my navy blue dress, my scuffed shoes, and my worn handbag. But belonging wasn't my goal. Tonight, I wasn't here to blend in. I was here to be seen. The doorman glanced at me, his eyes flicking up and down as though I were a stain on the carpet. "Ma'am, are you here for the Miller wedding?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm the mother of the bride." His posture changed immediately, and he stepped aside. That one sentence, "mother of the bride," carried more weight than any jewel in the room. As I stepped inside, heads turned. Some guests looked at me with confusion, others with faint amusement. My dress didn't shimmer. My jewelry didn't sparkle. But I walked slowly, carefully, my back straight and my eyes steady. Then I saw her. Melissa. She stood at the center of the room, laughing with Nathan's colleagues. Her satin gown hugged her figure, her hair gleamed under the lights, and her lips curled into that perfect smile she had practiced in mirrors. For a moment, she looked radiant. Then her eyes landed on me. Her smile froze. For a split second, I thought I saw fear. But just as quickly, it shifted into something else, a smirk. "Oh my God," one of her bridesmaids whispered loudly. She actually showed up. Melissa excused herself from the group, her gown flowing like a wave as she strode toward me. Guests stepped aside, watching the bride cut across the ballroom floor, her heels clicking like hammers. When she reached me, she leaned in, her voice sharp but soft enough for only me to hear. "I thought you forgot, she said, her lips twisting. Or maybe you finally took the hint. I held my handbag tightly and met her eyes. I wouldn't miss my daughter's wedding. Her gaze dropped to the frayed hem of my dress, and she chuckled under her breath. Well, she murmured, I suppose every fairy tale needs its wicked witch lurking in the corner. Just try not to embarrass me tonight, okay? Her words were meant to slice me open. Instead, they stitched me back together. Every insult, every sneer, every cruel laugh had led to this moment. And Melissa didn't even realize it. She spun on her heel, leaving me standing there as whispers rippled across the room. Some guests smiled politely in my direction, others avoided my gaze altogether. I made my way to a small table at the back, away from the clusters of polished people who barely noticed me. A waiter offered me champagne, but I declined and asked for water. My hands wrapped around the cool glass, steady even as my heart raced. From my seat, I could see everything, the way Melissa basked in attention, the way Nathan beamed proudly at her side, the way people fawned over them as though they were untouchable. But I knew better. I knew what lay hidden inside my handbag. Tell me, what would you do if your own child mocked you in front of a room filled with strangers? Would you bow your head and swallow the humiliation? Or would you wait, patient as stone, for the moment when the entire room would hear the truth? Because I was waiting. And my silence was almost over. An hour passed inside that ballroom, but to me, it felt like a lifetime. I sat in the back, sipping water, watching the people who believed I didn't belong. Nathan's father gave a long speech about legacy, about building a family name that would last generations. Guests applauded, glasses clinked, and Melissa stood beaming under the golden lights like a queen who had won her throne. When it was her turn to speak, she took the microphone with a confidence I had never seen. Her voice was smooth, her smile rehearsed. I just want to thank everyone who came to celebrate with us tonight, she said. This day wouldn't be possible without your love and support. And of course, without Nathan, who saved me from the kind of life I never wanted to live. He gave me the chance to start fresh, to be more than what I came from. The words landed like knives. More than what I came from. She was talking about me. The room laughed and applauded, her friends clinking their champagne glasses. Melissa's eyes flicked toward me, a little smirk curling at the corner of her mouth, daring me to react. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I waited. The reception rolled on. Dinner was served, couples danced, and the music swelled. I sat in my chair, every nerve in my body alive, every muscle taut. And when the moment felt right, I pushed back from the table and stood. At first, nobody noticed. But as I walked slowly toward the stage, heels clicking against the polished floor, heads began to turn. Conversations hushed. The string quartet trailed off mid-note. Melissa noticed me halfway across the room. Her smile faltered. Her hand froze on Nathan's arm. Mom, she said, her voice carrying a sharp note of irritation. What are you doing? I didn't answer. I climbed the steps to the stage, one hand on the rail, the other gripping my handbag tight against my side. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady. I felt the weight of every eye in the room on me. Eyes that had once dismissed me, now watching with curiosity, some with suspicion. When I reached the microphone stand, I turned to face the crowd. For a long moment, I said nothing. I simply let the silence expand, pressing down on everyone until the air itself seemed to tighten. Good evening, I finally said, my voice calm but firm. I know I wasn't expected here tonight. Some of you may not even know who I am. I'm Eleanor Whitman, Melissa's mother. A ripple of murmurs spread across the ballroom. I saw Nathan's parents exchange confused glances. Melissa crossed her arms tightly, her face locked in a smile that looked more like a mask. She's not supposed to be up there, she hissed to Nathan, though the microphone picked up her words. But I didn't move. I've listened tonight to words about legacy, family, and pride, I continued. But there's someone missing from this conversation. Someone who isn't here to defend herself. Melissa's grandmother. My mother. Gasps scattered through the room. Melissa's face drained of color. I reached into my handbag and pulled out the small cassette recorder. It looked worn and ordinary, out of place among the glittering chandeliers and silk gowns. But in that moment, it was the most powerful object in the room. Melissa stepped forward, panic flashing across her face. Mom, stop this. This is ridiculous. I held the recorder in my hand, thumb hovering over the play button. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, caught between confusion and anticipation. Tell me, what would you do if you carried proof that could shatter your child's lies in front of everyone she admired? Would you stay silent, or would you press play? Because I was ready. And in the next breath, the entire room would hear a voice from the grave. My thumb pressed down on the play button, and in an instant the ballroom fell into silence. The tape hissed softly at first, the kind of sound you almost had to lean in to hear. Then, through the crackle, came a voice none of them expected. This is Margaret Whitman, my mother's voice said, frail yet strong, echoing through the speakers. If you are hearing this, I have passed on. To my granddaughter Melissa, I leave my inheritance, but only if she honors the family that raised her. She must never forget her roots, never abandon those who sacrificed for her. If she fails, the inheritance is revoked and will pass directly to my daughter, Eleanor. Her words rang out like a gavel in a courtroom. For a long second, no one moved. Forks hovered in midair, glasses sat untouched, and the music had vanished into nothingness. All that remained was my mother's voice, filling every corner of the grand ballroom as if she were standing there in flesh and blood. Melissa's face drained of color. She lurched forward, grabbing for the recorder, but I held it just out of reach. She's lying. Melissa shouted, her voice cracking. This is some trick. My grandmother never said that. The guests shifted uneasily. Whispers swept through the room. It sounded so real. Could it be true? Nathan's parents exchanged sharp glances, their polite smiles long gone. Patricia Miller's hand clutched at her pearls, her eyes narrowing on Melissa as though she were seeing her for the first time. Melissa spun toward the crowd, her voice rising. Don't listen to this. My mom made it up. She's trying to ruin me, she's always been jealous, always trying to hold me back. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The voice of her grandmother, her blood, was answer enough. The whispers grew louder. Ungrateful. She lied about her past. Imagine calling your own mother useless. Melissa must have heard them, because her panic turned to fury. Her face twisted, and she jabbed a finger at me. You planned this, didn't you? She screamed. You couldn't stand to see me happy, so you dragged out a dead woman's voice to humiliate me. You're pathetic. Her words ricocheted off the walls, but they didn't wound me this time. They wounded her. Because the more she raged, the more the crowd recoiled. Nathan's jaw tightened. His hand gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "Melissa," he said through clenched teeth, "enough." But she didn't stop. She grabbed the microphone from its stand, her satin gown rippling as she spun toward the guests. "You all think she's some sweet old woman, but you don't know her. She's manipulative, she's pathetic, she's nothing. And now she's ruined my wedding day." Her voice cracked, shrill and desperate. And just like that, the tide turned. The same guests who had fawned over her hours earlier now stared in horror. Some shook their heads. Others whispered behind their hands. A bridesmaid quietly slipped out the side door, her face pale. A groomsman muttered, "This is a mess." Melissa's eyes darted around the room, searching for support. She found none. Nathan's father rose from his chair, his expression cold and unyielding. "This spectacle has embarrassed our family," he said, his voice carrying. "Melissa, do you realize how this looks? To speak this way about your own mother? At your wedding?" Melissa froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "And if what that recording said is true," Patricia added, her tone sharp as glass, "then you've deceived us. About family. About money. About who you really are." Melissa turned to Nathan, her face desperate. I didn't think it mattered. I thought she wouldn't. I thought she was too stupid to." Her words died in her throat. Nathan's eyes were hard, his voice colder than I'd ever heard. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Did you lie to me about the inheritance?" Melissa stammered, but nothing came out. Her silence was louder than any confession. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I saw her mask crumble completely. I leaned into the microphone, my voice steady. "For years, I've been silent. I've let my daughter call me useless, invisible. But tonight, the truth has spoken, not from me, but from her grandmother. From the woman she thought she could erase." The ballroom was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the speakers. Every eye was on me, but for once, I wasn't ashamed. I was powerful. "Tell me, what would you do if the lies your child told for years finally came crashing down in front of everyone she wanted to impress? Would you look away? Or would you stand tall and let the truth echo, no matter how deafening the silence afterward?" Because I chose to stand tall. And the silence that followed was my victory. For a moment after my mother's voice faded from the speakers, the room felt frozen in place. The chandeliers glittered above us, but no one dared to move. All eyes were fixed on Melissa, the bride who had been so radiant just an hour ago, now trembling in front of her guests. She gripped the microphone tighter, her knuckles pale. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "She's lying. She planned this to ruin me. My grandmother would never say something like that." But the guests weren't buying it. I could see it in their faces, suspicion, pity, even disgust. A woman in the front row shook her head. A man whispered, "Ungrateful," to his wife, who nodded in agreement. Melissa's voice grew shrill as she tried to overpower the whispers. "You don't know her like I do. She's manipulative, pathetic, always trying to drag me down. She's just jealous of what I built." Her words cut through the room, but instead of gaining sympathy, they dug her hole deeper. Nathan stood beside her, his jaw tight. He reached for the microphone, but she yanked it back. "Don't touch me," she snapped. The crowd gasped. That wasn't the elegant bride they had toasted just hours ago. That was a woman unraveling in front of everyone who mattered to her. Patricia Miller rose from her seat, her pearls glinting in the light. Her voice was cold, deliberate. "Melissa, do you even hear yourself? This is your wedding reception. And you're screaming at your mother in front of everyone. Is this who you really are?" Melissa's eyes darted around the room, desperate for support. But the bridesmaids avoided her gaze. One quietly slipped out the side door, heels clicking against the marble as if fleeing from the scene. A groomsman muttered, "This is a disaster," before sinking lower in his chair. The harder Melissa fought, the more she lost. She turned on me again, her face blotched red with anger and shame. "Mom, stop this. Tell them it's fake. Tell them you made it up." Her voice cracked, and for the first time that night, there was something beneath the fury, fear. Real fear. I didn't move. I let the silence speak for me. Nathan finally stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Melissa, enough. Do you realize how this looks? To stand here, calling your own mother pathetic? To scream at her in front of 200 guests?" Melissa's lip trembled. She reached for his arm. "Nathan, please, you don't understand. She's..." He pulled back. His face was hard now, his eyes filled with something colder than anger, disappointment. Melissa stumbled, her gown swishing awkwardly around her legs. She looked out at the crowd, but instead of admiration, she saw judgment. Head shaking. Eyes narrowing. People whispering about the bride who had destroyed her own fairy tale. I sat calmly in my chair, water glass in hand. For once, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt steady. Melissa had always believed I was powerless, that my silence meant weakness. But tonight, she was learning the truth: silence can be sharper than any blade. "Tell me, what would you do if the child you sacrificed everything for stood in front of a crowd and tried to erase you with lies? Would you shout back, fight for your dignity with words? Or would you sit in silence, knowing the truth was already tearing them apart from within?" Because I chose silence. And in that silence, Melissa destroyed herself. The silence in the ballroom was heavy, like a curtain pressing down on every guest. Melissa stood trembling, her face blotched, her gown shimmering under the lights as though mocking her unraveling composure. She looked around desperately, but no one was clapping, no one was smiling. The room had turned cold. Then Patricia Miller, Nathan's mother, rose slowly from her seat. Her pearls caught the light, her back straight, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but it carried like thunder. "Melissa," she said, "do you realize how this looks? To speak this way about your own mother at your wedding?" The guests shifted, nodding quietly, whispering among themselves. Patricia's words carried the authority of a verdict. Melissa's lip quivered. I didn't mean it like that. You don't understand. My mom." Patricia raised a hand, silencing her. "Enough excuses. We heard the tape. We heard your grandmother's wishes. And what we saw tonight is a young woman willing to spit on her family just to please strangers. That is not strength, Melissa. That is disgrace." The ballroom went still again. Melissa swayed slightly, her eyes darting toward Nathan. He had been silent until now, his jaw tight, his hands clasped together. When he finally spoke, his words were sharper than a blade. "Is it true?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but the entire room heard it. "Did you lie to me about the inheritance? Melissa's face drained of color. Nathan, please, I didn't lie, I didn't think it mattered. I thought she'd never show up. I thought she'd. Her voice cracked, the excuse collapsing in on itself. Nathan shook his head. So you let me believe we were building this life together with honesty, while you were hiding the truth. You stood here and told everyone you made it on your own, when really, you erased your own family to make yourself look stronger. Melissa reached for his arm, but he stepped back. His eyes no longer held love, only disappointment. Nathan's father cleared his throat, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. Melissa, our family values legacy and integrity above all else. We cannot tie ourselves to lies and disgrace. Tonight was supposed to unite our families. Instead, it has revealed rot at the root. The words landed like a blow. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A bridesmaid lowered her champagne glass, her eyes wide. A groomsman muttered, "This is over." Melissa's shoulders slumped. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her lips trembling. "Please," she whispered, her voice small now. "You don't understand. I just wanted respect. I just wanted to be someone." Patricia's face softened slightly, but only for a moment. Respect isn't bought with lies, Melissa. And it certainly isn't earned by shaming the woman who raised you. Melissa turned toward me then, her eyes pleading. "Mom, help me. Please. Tell them it's not true. Tell them you made it up." The microphone in her hand shook as she held it out toward me. For a heartbeat, I thought of the little girl who once clung to my skirt at the grocery store, begging me not to let go. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had chosen vanity over truth. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Because I didn't need to. The Millers had given their verdict. And it was final. Tell me, what would you do if the family your child was desperate to impress finally saw through her lies? Would you rush to protect her from the shame, or would you let her feel the weight of her choices? Because I let her feel it. And that weight was heavier than anything I could have handed her myself. Melissa's hand shook as she clutched the microphone, her eyes wild and glossy with tears. The ballroom had gone deathly quiet, 200 guests waiting to see what the bride would say next. The weight of judgment hung in the air like smoke after a fire. She turned toward me, her voice cracking. "Mom, please. Please, fix this. Tell them it's not true. Tell them you made it up. You can't do this to me, not here, not tonight." Her words weren't sharp now. They weren't cruel. They were desperate, begging, stripped of the smugness she had carried for years. For a moment, I looked at her and saw not the bride dripping in satin and pride, but the little girl she used to be. The one who clung to my skirt at the grocery store, whispering, "Don't let go, Mama." My heart ached, but not enough to erase the pain of being called useless. The microphone trembled in her hand. "Please, Mom," she whispered again, this time so softly it almost broke me. "Don't leave me like this." I rose slowly from my chair, the crowd parting as I walked toward the stage. Every step felt heavier than the last, but my resolve was stronger. My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing like a drumbeat. When I reached her, I leaned close enough that only she could hear me. "You wanted me gone, Melissa," I whispered. "You laughed behind my back and told the world I was useless. Tonight, you learned the truth. A mother's silence isn't weakness, it's patience." Her knees buckled. She gripped the microphone stand just to stay upright. I straightened and spoke into the microphone, my voice carrying through the stunned crowd. I never came here to ruin anyone's night. I came because my daughter forgot something important. Family is not a curse you can run from. It is the root that keeps you steady. Forget it, and you lose everything. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Some guests nodded, others wiped away tears, and a few clapped softly, as though my words carried more weight than any toast that had come before. Melissa turned to me, her face streaked with mascara, her lips trembling. "Mom, please," she tried again. But this time, her voice was hollow. I shook my head slowly. "You did this to yourself." Her hand slipped from the microphone stand, and she stumbled back, collapsing into a chair at the edge of the stage. Her gown spilled around her like a broken crown, her tiara slightly askew. The room that had once adored her now looked at her with pity and judgment. I handed the microphone back to the master of ceremonies, my hand steady. Then I stepped down from the stage and walked back to my seat at the far corner of the room. I lifted my glass of water, sipped calmly, and let the silence linger. "Tell me, if your child begged you to erase the truth after years of mocking and erasing you, would you have saved her from this shame? Or would you have let her feel the full weight of her choices?" Because I let her feel it. And that silence spoke louder than any words I could have given her. The music never started again that night. The ballroom, once glittering with laughter and champagne, had turned into a mausoleum of silence. Guests lingered awkwardly at their tables, whispering, glancing at Melissa, then looking away as if even eye contact might stain their reputations. I sat quietly in my chair at the back, sipping my water as though nothing had happened. For the first time in years, I felt taller than the chandeliers above me. My daughter's kingdom of lies had crumbled, and all I had done was press play. When the evening finally limped to its end, Nathan escorted Melissa out, his hand firm on her arm, not with affection, but with restraint. I watched her stumble under the weight of her gown, her head bowed, her once perfect image shattered into pieces that no amount of makeup could repair. I didn't stay for goodbyes. I gathered my handbag, walked through the double doors, and let the cool Chicago air wash over me like a baptism. For the first time in a long time, I breathed freely. But the real storm was only beginning. By morning, the whispers had spread. In Nathan's world, a world of lawyers, bankers, and socialites, gossip traveled faster than truth. Videos recorded on guests' phones leaked onto social media before the cake was even served. Clips of Melissa screaming at me, calling me pathetic, denying her own grandmother's voice, circulated online with captions like "Bride Meltdown" and "When the Truth Shows Up at Your Wedding." By the end of the week, Nathan's family had released a statement. Polite, formal, and final. They spoke of irreconcilable differences and a breach of trust. Within a month, Nathan filed for annulment. Their marriage had been built on sand, and my silence had pulled the tide in. Melissa moved out of their gleaming condo and into a small apartment on the far side of the city. The friends who once clung to her drifted away, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Invitations dried up. Contracts Nathan had lined up through family connections slipped quietly through his fingers. For the first time, Melissa was alone. She called me once. Her voice was smaller, softer, stripped of its arrogance. "Mom," she whispered, I need help. Please." I held the phone to my ear, and for a moment, I thought of every sacrifice I had made for her. The sleepless nights, the double shifts, the pawned necklace, the loneliness I swallowed just to keep her dreams alive. I thought of all the times she laughed at me, erased me, called me useless.